Hey guys, my name is Discourse. Welcome to another video for the Batman Miniatures game. Just a quick one today where we're going to talk about the Organized Crime crew deck. So I recently had an opportunity to play as Organized Crime in a game. So this is just a quick summary of my thoughts on the Organized Crime crew deck, just because it was my first time playing with the deck. Now typically I tend to record my thoughts on the decks, on the crews and things like that during the battle reports whenever I summarize sort of the game at the very end. But I know not a lot of people are going to watch all the way through those, get through the hour and a bit content of actual gameplay just to hear my thoughts on it. So I thought I'd just do a quick video today with all of my thoughts just so it's easily accessible, because I'm sure there are a few people who are probably just interested in my impressions of the new deck. I think just because obviously we have the new decks have come out now, they're available to everyone, but not everyone's had an opportunity to play with them. So this is just my thoughts on the deck. Now, this isn't my final thought, this isn't set in stone in any way, this isn't a top 3 cards video or anything like that. My opinions here will probably change, but these are just my very first thoughts, initial impressions of the deck having played a game with them. Now, to give you a bit of background, I've always been a big fan of Organized Crime. Taking that out of context, as a crew, I should say. So I love Falcone, I love Maroni, I love The Long Halloween. It's probably my favorite graphic novel. I love Rupert Thorne, remember that guy? So he was an amalgamation of both Falcone and Maroni on the Batman animated series. That guy was great. Year 1 and the early years of Batman are probably my favorite canonical time in Batman, so OC always really appealed to me. So I'd really been eagerly awaiting the Organized Crime deck to come out. Now the crew I assembled, basically I assembled what I had on hand, and what I had on hand was a Falcone family pack and a Maroni family pack. So I decided to play Falcone, so I took him as my leader. Between the two, I think between him and Maroni, Falcone just edges it out in terms of being more iconic. And then I just took with him a few of the suited goons. So I took the Bull, Vipera, Malatesta, Troy Sins, and Batista. The Bull for the stun damage, just close combat master. Vipera, just the pistol with silencer, I thought would be really handy. Malatesta is a really fast model. He's got like 10 inches of movement, and he also has the fast trait and a broken bottle, which you cannot emphasize enough. The broken wine bottle is very classy. And then I took Batista just for the shotgun. It's a pretty good shotgun, doesn't use a template, only has a rate of fire 1, but double blood, single stun weapon. And finally I took Troy Sins as well, just as another goon. So a lot of endurance 4, willpower 4, defense 2 guys here, so not very impressive stats wise. And I only brought the 5 of those guys. And the reason why I only brought the 5 of those guys alongside Falcone was because I also brought Deathstroke. So Deathstroke, I took him as a huge kind of centerpiece model, essentially designed to threaten my opponent's main pieces, because I knew that my Organized Crime goons probably weren't getting a lot of kills. And it also felt really thematic to bring a mercenary like Deathstroke in the crew. He's basically a guy that I can imagine Falcone paying $1 million to kill Batman, right? Bring me his cape and cowl. Now, it also helped that I didn't have a lot of options in terms of my Organized Crime crew. I only had the Maroni and Falcone family packs. So Deathstroke being 150 reputation wasn't a big deal. In fact, it was kind of useful for me to be able to fill up so much of the crew with that. So the crew I was playing with was very atypical, not very usual at all. My plan was basically to keep the suited goons around Falcone. They were going to get the for the family trait that Falcone gives to all of his henchmen, which would allow them the bodyguard for Falcone, and then Deathstroke would simply run about the map getting kills. Now, I think in hindsight, I definitely could have played a much wider style of crew, and I definitely think that might have been better. But I will say that Deathstroke ended up being a much stronger pick than I had initially anticipated. I thought it was going to be a bit of an albatross around my neck, honestly. Just when you put so many eggs in that one basket, if they get smashed, you have no more eggs. And I was really concerned that Deathstroke would simply die, and then I would basically have no one else to follow up with. But Deathstroke ended up being a very strong pick, and the reason for that is probably down to my first observation about the Organized Crime crew deck, which is that, boy, you sure get rewarded for killing models in Organized Crime. Way more than I anticipated. There's just a lot of cards in the Organized Crime deck that scores off of kills and making casualties, and Deathstroke really finds it very easy to kill other models. So in terms of cards in the deck that you can score for killing models, the first one that springs to mind is Message Job. And this might be one of the simplest cards in the game. The scoring condition of this is that you have to make an enemy model a casualty. That's it, and that's great. That's a lovely and clean condition, and it has a great resource as well. It allows you to reduce the defense of a model by 1, so that's superb. This card was great. I scored this. I think I scored every single iteration of this card. Deathstroke was just a murder machine. I used this card as a resource as well. It's just a superb card. Really brings a lot to the crew. Next up is the Program, which is another card that rewards you for making an enemy model a casualty. The only caveat is that the model that you've chosen to kill needs to have previously revealed a suspect marker of yours. Now this seems okay. It's definitely a bit more conditional when compared to the message job card, but I never actually drew this card during the game, so I don't have a lot of thoughts on it just yet, but my just initial impressions of it are that it seems so-so compared to message job. And then alongside that, you have Spring Cleaning, which basically means which requires you to kill a model, and then that model essentially explodes like a Ramona Flowers boyfriend in a shower of suspect markers that scatter out from their corpse. And then once you have revealed the 2 suspect markers, you score this card. This is deceptively great. I think sleeper wise, this might probably be the best card in the deck, even though it's arguably harder to score than message job. And the reason why I think it's so great is that it means that even if your opponent is not playing the suspect marker game, they are just not putting down suspect markers, you can use this card to force them to put down 2 suspect markers. And the thing about crew that isn't placing down a lot of suspect markers is that they're probably in your face trying to kill your guys, which means that it will be more likely that you kill one of their models. So it's very good in that sense. It should get easier to play the more benefit you get from it. And the fact that this forces your opponent to place suspect markers down is really important, because there's another great card in the organized crime deck, which is called Paying Tribute. This is a great card, very easily scored, requires you to reveal an enemy suspect marker and then place down one of your own suspect markers in range of the boss. And these suspect markers that get put down by Spring Cleaning, they activate Paying Tribute. So Spring Cleaning basically sets up Paying Tribute, and it sets up another card as well, which is Recovering the Juice. Prior to the game beginning, I did a quick scan through the deck. I've had a little look through them, in the past. And my very initial impressions of the deck was that Recovering the Juice would probably be a really tough card to score. But during the actual game itself, I found it pretty easy to pick models that my opponent didn't want to prioritize and use them to pick up suspect markers that had been put down previously by the Spring Cleaning card. So Recovering the Juice requires you to reveal an enemy suspect marker and survive through the round. It's very similar to Die Hard. It's played on the second phase, so everyone knows who the model is going into phase 3. Now, using that model to pick up suspect markers that had been placed down by Spring Cleaning felt super efficient. So good. You're setting yourself up with Spring Cleaning, you're killing a model, placing down 2 suspect markers of the opponent, and then using a model to reveal a suspect marker, and then you get to score 3 points off of Recovering the Juice. So it's a very high point scorer, and the way I played it, I basically played it as a more conditional Die Hard. So a lot of the upsides of Die Hard apply to this card as well. Namely, that you can basically pick models that your opponent won't want to kill, they don't want to prioritize, or just can't be bothered with. So the more I think about this deck, the more I'm beginning to suspect that Spring Cleaning might be the anchor by which a lot of the other cards can be set up. Let's be honest, there's a lot of crews out there that would love a card that forced your enemy to put down suspect markers, and Spring Cleaning does just that. Now, like I said before, it's activated by making a casualty of an enemy model, so once again, organized crime really do seem to focus on murdering people and playing with suspect markers. Now, in the game itself, one of the benefits I think I had was that my opponent fought me around my deployment zone, and I think that's pretty much the perfect situation for an organized crime crew, just because they have a really high scoring card called Pinch Mobster that scores for 3 points. And how this scores is whenever a friendly model takes damage, you place down a marker, and this marker can be manipulated and moved 4 inches, and then when this marker reaches your deployment zone, you score the card for 3 points. So because we were fighting a lot in my deployment zone, it meant that whenever I took any damage at all and I had this card in my hand, I was just throwing down a marker and getting 3 points. So it was just excellent, just great. I think that otherwise, if you're not fighting in your deployment zone, this card might be relatively tough to score, and it may take more than a single turn to get the marker back to your zone by manipulating it enough times. 4 inches isn't a huge amount of movement, and using up a manipulate action can be pretty tough, especially because there's other cards like Paying Tribute that will require you to use your manipulate actions instead. There is another card, Killing the Rat. I think with my crew composition, I had a really tough time scoring it. Basically, the crew composition was too small. I found it hard to score, but but I can see that it has potential to score in the second and third round of a game, depending on how aggressively your opponent is placing suspect markers down. I definitely think with a more typical wide organized crime crew, they might have a much easier time scoring this card. Basically just bum rushing a suspect marker. I think the radius being 6 inches really helps that. And then finally, the last card is Shakedown. This card scores if you knock an enemy opponent KO and there are 3 suspect markers around that model. Now, I managed to actually score this card, but it was really tough. This took the guts of an entire round to basically set this thing up for a measly 2 points. Now, you don't need to have only your suspect markers around it. It can be your opponent's suspect markers as well. So if you're playing against an opponent that wants to have a lot of suspect markers out, maybe someone like League of Assassins, or you've used spring cleaning to force suspect markers out, then this can be easier to score. But I had to do this one the old-fashioned way with inspired manipulate actions, and it was a real slog. So yeah, just another card the spring cleaning helps set up. Finally, there is the special organized crime crew special ability, and this is the black market equipment. Honestly, I didn't use this very often, and it wasn't that I didn't have enough black market money to spend. In fact, it was quite the opposite. I had loads. I think I ended the game with like $800. I think the problem was that I didn't have a lot of henchmen, so I couldn't really take a huge amount of advantage from this. I was also in a very dominant position from the second round onwards of the game, so I never really felt any pressure to use this. And I think that the equipment bonuses are good. It's just it's a new thing for me to have to sort of manage, and I just wasn't really thinking about that equipment when I was busy trying to score cards. But I think it's one of those things in the future I'm going to be trying to keep it in mind more often. I think that the black market equipment is really good, especially against the Batman crew, especially if they have a lot of cops. In fact, I think that organized crime will generally be a really fun matchup against the Batman crew. If the Batman crew's bringing a lot of cops, they want to remove a lot of suspect markers, and I just think that plays really well into the organized crime playstyle, just because the organized crime crew require a lot of suspect markers to be floating around the board as sort of a precondition for their murdering. And finally, just overall, in terms of resources for organized crime, the resources on a lot of their cards are pretty cheap. There's a lot of 1 resource and 0 resource cards. Now, this is overall a very good thing. You want cheaper resources on your cards. But honestly, I was a little bit disappointed because I was playing as Falcone and I rarely got to spend enough resources each round to make his grand strategist trait worthwhile. Like, I really felt like I could have been spending a lot more money on cards, and there just wasn't really opportunities to do so. Then I also fell into the trap of trying to score the cards that I had in my hand as opposed to trying to score cards in my deck. That is to say, I was focused too much on trying to set up my cards instead of just cycling them out and finding new cards in my deck that I would probably find easier to score. But overall, I had a lot of fun with the organized crime crew. They very quickly shot up above a few other crews that I have already played in terms of my favorite crew. I always knew that would be the case just because I really like the theme of them, but still I was impressed at how fun they are. So yeah, definitely would recommend organized crime from my very first game. Hope to play them a lot more. Hope to play some more typical crew styles, i.e. I want to have at least 11 activations in a list at some stage. And generally speaking, I just think they have an easier deck to score than someone, say, like Two-Face, for example. But obviously their models just aren't really as strong. So yeah, had a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me today, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye!